Hello, and welcome to Healing from Grief and Loss, where top experts guide you on your journey to find strength, comfort, and joy again. I'm Andrea, your host, and on today's show, my guest expert is the lovely Sherry Jean Olander. I'm actually going to make sure I get every word correct here. Sherry is a licensed dynamic emotional integration trainer and consultant. That's a mouthful, and we're going to learn about that a little later on. Sherry, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Grief is one of my favorite emotions and one of my favorite topics. So I'm really grateful that you asked me to be part of this.
Thank you so much. Yes, a lot of grief happening right now, and we need to get it out on the table. We need to talk about it, feel comfortable talking about it. You actually had a time, about 18 months, I guess, in your life where you grieved several significant things. And I can relate, I'm sure, to some of the things, and probably not so much to others. But grieving is just one of those, we all deal in our own way, and no one grief is better or more significant than another. It's just grief is grief, and it is a big topic. And I'm hoping that you'll just share with us some of the things that you went through and your journey to healing.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So it was about 6.5 years ago or so now. The fall of 2013 is when this 18-month period started for me. And I was I was kind of dealing with a little bit of depression at the time and stress in general, just kind of being overwhelmed with some things. The first thing that happened was kind of a falling out with a friend. We didn't get into a fight or anything, but kind of long story short, she got into a new relationship and got pregnant. And at that time for me, kind of without going into all of the details around it, I had been basically I was trying to come to terms with the fact that I may not find a partner and may not be able to have a family like I had always wanted to, or have children. I was still young enough then that, it wasn't out of the question, but my relationship history was not ideal, and I just never had good luck finding partners. So, it's kind of like I didn't have the financial kind of situation that I could do it on my own, because otherwise I would have. Anyway, and so because of the strain in the friendship and then, hearing that she had gotten pregnant, it really just hit me in a way that really made that loss kind of come up, like the need to really grieve that hope that I had of having a family. It just kind of hit me, for various reasons at the time, in a way that really made me pause. And I remember, kind of getting the phone call and having all of these things come up at once. And it was just, at the time it didn't seem like so devastating. It was just like, oh my gosh, like this just upwelling of emotion. And then, but then I, looking back at the end of the 18 months, I realized that was kind of the first thing that happened. Soon after, I've had a tumultuous relationship with my mother most of my life, and she wasn't really around much. I was raised by my grandparents for the most part, and it was a pretty toxic relationship. And I reached a point where I had just had enough, and I basically had to cut ties with her. This conversation happened on the phone where I was just in so much pain because of her kind of disregard, that I had to just say, this is it, this is enough. And so I had to basically grieve that relationship as well. And so that was fall, winter, in the and there were, you know, kind of little things along the way that I don't even remember at this point. But in the spring of 2014, my grandfather died, and he was my father, basically. He raised me. You know, he was such a support for me my whole life. And so that was a really big blow. And it was hard. It was the hardest thing I've had to do. And then I had to go, because what happened, he had a heart attack, and I had to go up to New York. He was in the hospital for a week before he passed. So in that, I was, you know, trying to support my grandmother and my uncle, and my mother and her girlfriend were there. We hadn't spoken, you know, and so it was like all of this stuff kind of all culminating while I was trying to you know, be there for my grandfather who was dying. 6 months after that, almost to the day, my uncle, who was handicapped and lived with my grandparents, and he was like a brother to me growing up, he also passed. So it was just like one thing after another for a while. And I think towards the end of it, kind of the tail end of the 18-month period, my best friend and I had bought property in a rural town near Charlottesville, where I live, and we had tried to start an herb farm. We had this dream, you know, we were going to do, like, you know, grow herbs and sell them, and, you know, like, and we tried, and we tried lots of things, and it was made for great stories and adventures along the way. But at the end, it became clear that it wasn't going to work for various reasons, and I had to decide to let that go and leave. And so that was kind of the last part of that. But it was a lot. It was a lot. And thankfully I had read Language of Emotions, which is Carla McLaren's, one of her first books in this work that I do. And so while I was going through this, I did have a lot of skills that I learned from the book, and kind of an attitude towards, or an understanding of what was going on and what was appropriate. And so that was really helpful. I don't know that I could have gotten through it as I did without that information.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing. It sounds like it wasn't the easiest time in your life, that's for sure. I can totally relate with things. It was like a snowball effect for me too, where it just seemed like it was one thing after another, as far as deaths and etc. So I totally can, that totally resonates with me. So when you were going through your time and you know, doing your reading and such, did you have any kind of support system? Like, were there any other people that you know, you reached out to, or that, you know, had a gentle listening ear for you? What did you do for support?
You know, I had some close friends that, and all of my friends were, you know, just kind of supportive in general. But I, you know, the something ironic that happened, and kind of a little bit kind of cosmically twisted. The week before, I was at work. The week before my grandfather had his heart attack, I was at work talking to a colleague, and we were talking about death. And I mentioned to her, because I mentioned my struggle finding a relationship throughout my life, and I was single at the time, and I mentioned to her, you know, I just really hope I have a partner, you know, when my grandparents pass, because I can't imagine having to do that alone. And a week later, you know, my grandfather had a heart attack, and there I was. It was like, well, here you go. This is, you know, you don't have a partner. And so to a large degree, I felt like I did have to handle it alone. I felt like I had to be strong for my grandmother, because it was, I think, hard. She was his wife, and they lived together, and it was, it was devastating for her, of course. So I felt like I had to be strong for her, and we just have different ways. Like for me, I'm very open griever. Like I need to talk about it. I want it, I want like, and she's the very much opposite. So like I could support her, but she could not support me, other than just being there and having that. I did have one really close friend from home, from Long Island, where I grew up, who was able to come over, and he knew my grandfather, because we went to high school together. And he was very supportive. Like he came over, and I was able to just kind of talk and cry. And that was really helpful, just to have somebody that I didn't have to protect through it, that could be there and just kind of hold the space for me. And my uncle was supportive in the way that he could be, but he was more of a private kind of griever himself. But he just being there. The thing that I did for myself that was supportive was I just kind of followed my instincts, and I felt the urge to just gather all of these pictures of him and make a kind of like a flipboard collage of just all of the memories I had of him and that my family had of him, that we planned to bring to the memorial luncheon we were going to have. And that was very supportive for me, just kind of honoring remembering, really, when it comes down to it, remembering everything, was what was the most supportive.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. It is tough for a lot of people because, the subject is tough. People grieve differently, like I mentioned earlier. And I find, for myself, it was, you sound like a broken record, but you have to talk about it. And then there's those that, keep it inside. And of course, grief is something that we, have to go through it. We have to deal with it. We can't just go around it and sweep it under the rug and, put the covers over our head. So it's, you need some sort of support. And I think for me too, I wasn't really sure what to do, or who to reach out to, or scared that, I was going to be judged like, oh, she's so depressed, here she comes, and oh, what is she going to cry about today? Like, so there's such a stigma around it. And that's why just, bringing this summit to life, I just want people to know that, there is help out there, and you can reach out, and don't be afraid, and don't feel you have to be alone. And I'm dying to know and I know our viewers are too, I want to know, what does a dynamic emotional integration trainer do? What?
So in terms of being a trainer, I just teach people the work. I also do consultations, which is one-on-one, and it's more like helping people explore their own emotional realm with the consultations. In terms of what it is, it's based on Carla McLaren's work that she's created. And one of the biggest differences in DEI, for short, is that we don't view emotions as being positive or negative. There are no good emotions, there are no bad emotions. Emotions all have their unique gifts and purposes that they arise for in our life. So grief, for example, most people think about grief as this terrible emotion, but in DEI, our perspective is that terrible things happen in life. Grief is the emotion that arises to help us deal with those things. So it's hard to sometimes it's hard to kind of make space for that difference, but I've found it immensely helpful. And that goes across all of the emotions. You know, they're often uncomfortable, but it's usually the situations that have caused the emotions to arise that are the problems, that are the bad things, the, you know, the negative experiences, but the emotions arise in service to inform us and support us.
Right. Okay. So that makes more sense. I hope that's clear for our viewers too. um, so so it's obviously, you know, a bit of a different approach than what you know, some of the life coaches do, or you know, therapists and such. Um, so if so if someone were to So if someone were to come to you for an appointment, can you give us an idea of like what sort of steps you would implement for them to get started on their healing journey?
Sure. Before the start of any DEI consultation is the person will fill out a questionnaire, usually online. A link is sent, and it's an online questionnaire. And I don't know, I forget how many questions exactly, about maybe 15 or 20 questions. And it's what the questions do is give me or whichever consultant a snapshot of where they are with their emotional skills right now. The questions, you wouldn't know it if you're not familiar with this work, but they all are talking about the gifts of different emotions. And you know, you answer them on a scale of 1 to 4, 1 being always, 4 being never. And that gives me a snapshot of kind of where to start. Also, you know, you would talk about your situation that is wanting you to seek support. And so when we actually meet, about a week after usually, it's really just like a conversation. I will use the questionnaire as a guideline in terms of, there are certain things that might pop out to me that I want to start with first. I might see certain emotions really seem to be, you know, you might seem to be struggling with, or certain emotions you might have really strong, and sometimes that is an indication of something that might help unfold the story a little bit. So I use the questionnaire as a guide, but really it's just a conversation. And the big difference, I think, people always, it's a very unique kind of experience, a DEI consultation, and people, the most similar things people know of that they usually ask, you know, is it like a coaching session, or is it a therapy session? And it's neither of those things. It includes aspects of both, especially just in the kind of conversational, like it's a talking thing, one-on-one. But basically, the emotions themselves of the person are guiding. They are the keepers of the wisdom and the keepers of the source of healing. And so I have an understanding of how emotions usually work in people, but each person is the expert on their own emotions, and the emotions are the expert on the person's life and experience. So I watch for the emotions that are coming up and ask questions, and you know, offer insights or suggestions according to the conversation, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So if you could give, just based on your healing journey, if you could give some advice to our viewers that are possibly going through something traumatic right now, whether it's, you know, the loss of a family member, or a pet, or a job, or a friend, a relationship. What are some tips, Sherry, that you could give them to help them just to move forward and just get a little bit unstuck?
Sure. Well, I guess first I'd push back a little bit just on the idea of moving forward and getting unstuck, because the really, as you mentioned earlier, the only way, you know, to the only way to heal from a loss is to let grief do its work, you know, to go through it, basically. And if we have in the back of our minds to get to this happier place, or I need to get over this, or if there's, sometimes that can interfere with the process. My biggest thing with grief is I really just tell people to trust themselves, trust their body. I feel grief is a very visceral emotion compared to some of the others. And, you know, the important thing, or the kind of action that grief calls us to do, is honor the loss more than anything. And that can be painful, because, you know, it's directly proportional to how much we loved and cared about the thing that we lost, or how much we wanted it. And so it's going to hurt, but there really is a beauty, and there can be even a comfort in that pain if we allow the grief to do its work. Something, just kind of a little bit of a tangent, if I may. When I got the call that my grandfather, you know, had a heart attack, and I knew it was serious, I had to make the drive up to New York. So it was like 8 hours basically of thinking and, you know, feeling, and I was just letting my grief be there. And he, you know, he hadn't died yet, but it was pretty certain that's what was going to happen. And I just let my love for him be with me, with all the pain that it brought up, knowing that was going to end. And at one point I had to stop for gas, you know, stopped at a service station, you know, one of those big ones on the highway. And I was in line waiting for some coffee. And there was a parent with a baby, you know, that was facing me on their shoulder. And I just had this moment of pure joy, because my grandfather loved babies, you know, and I was thinking, like, if he were there, he would be, you know, playing with the baby. And it was just such a amazing experience of how close grief and joy are in our emotional realm, because they both lower our boundaries to connect with our community and the world, and, you know, the bigger picture, and you know, if you're spiritual, God or religion or anything like that. And in that moment I was in utter grief, but I also had utter joy. And it really showed that they're not opposites, that there's like sisters. I call them sister emotions, because there's such a close bond between them. But then in terms of what to do to you know, what to honor, like how to process, I think really listen to your heart, listen to what your body and emotion is calling for. Grief rituals and grief shrines I've found extremely helpful for very hard and deep grief, or old grief. And you know, I won't get into that too much, because there's all sorts of kind of ways to go about that, but there's lots of resources. But, you know, having some sort of table where you can put, you know, you can visit on a daily basis. The grief ritual that I ended up doing, I actually put a giant piece of paper on my wall, and every time I felt grief, I would go and I would write the thing that I was feeling the loss of. And I would draw a picture, doodle, and, you know, it was just very personal, very, you know, it wasn't very pretty, but it worked for me. It allowed me space to process and to honor, like, all of those little losses from child, you know, things that had gone, because when I had that 18-month period, it basically broke open all of this grief from childhood that had yet to be processed. And that kind of is a good segue into what I say a lot about grief is it is one of the most patient emotions. It will wait until we're ready. But it will have to be reckoned with at some point. I often personify grief as a grandmotherly wise woman who just waits until you're ready, and then she'll come take you by the hand and lead you through the memories lead you through the loss so that you can really honor it and make it part of you in a way that's less painful than when you first feel it.
I love that. I love that. Yes, Sherry, thank you for sharing. I love the thought of grief and joy being like sisters, because they can be so similar. And you know, how do you, one minute you're feeling such grief, but then you can, like your story of your grandfather, you know, that baby, like it was just sort of a sign of, you know, I'm going to feel joy again. It's going to happen again. And you know, you can't feel guilty. That's another emotion that seems to come up with people, that you know, they don't want to feel joy again. They should just remain sad, and you know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't, you know, I'm not supposed to be happy. But that's not the way either. And a patient grandmother, I love that too, because I kept beating myself up, like, why is this happening to me, and why is this taking so long? Why can't I feel myself again? Why am I crying so much? Like, it just, yeah, but you've got to just give the time, and be patient. It is, yeah, it is. Grief is a patient emotion for sure. Yes, I love that. Thank you. Well, so much to talk about and so little time. Is there anything else that you feel that you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up?
I think nothing's coming to mind. I think that you know, there's the kind of main important points about what
Yeah,
grief can do for us, I think I've touched on.
yeah. Thank you. Um, you definitely gave me some things to think about, and yeah, I just like that, the sister emotions. That's a good one for today. So we will end on that. I thank you so much for joining me today. Pleasure talking to you. Um, so much insight and inspiration, and we will have your information, of course, at the bottom of the video. So if anyone wants to reach out and try some of this DEI for themselves, they'll know where to find you. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you also. Yes, and I'm going to be offering a grief, exploring your grief worksheet that I think will be part of that on the links or whatever. So thank you so much, Andrea.
You're welcome. And yes, we'll make sure we have all the links. And I just want to thank my audience today for joining us. I hope something touched your soul. Many things touched mine. Thank you, Sherry. And until the next time, like I like to say, please be safe and be kind to yourself. Take the time you need. It's okay. And most importantly, remember, you are not alone. So until we meet again, bye for now.